back there? Anybody can't hear me? Wait. Okay, let's see, how do I advance? Just hit the little arrows to advance it.
I think the easiest thing is just to hit the arrow button.
Okay.
Like here is this too, if you prefer. You can hit that arrow button.
Well, Andrew was having trouble.
Yeah, Erica had problems too.
Okay, so maybe you've been out shopping lately and seen these very tempting displays of bare root fruit trees. And you look at that and you think, oh, wow, a vision comes into your mind and you can see yourself standing out the back door and you pick this perfectly ripe piece of fruit and it's blemish free and you take a big bite right there in your yard and the juices run down. It's like, how could anything be better than that, right? So I encourage you to stop before you stick that in your cart. And maybe wonderful, but some things that you need to consider. Does this variety grow well here in the rainy west side? What rootstock is it growing on? And is that a rootstock that's going to best suit my needs? What do I want from this fruit? Do I want to have mostly fresh fruit? Do I, if I down the road suddenly have more fresh fruit than I know what to do with? Is this a variety that's going to do well in storage? Can you cook with it? So the whole scenario about what you want out of this tree. Okay, we're gonna go through really briefly a little bit about apples, pears, cherries, peaches, and mostly where to find information and what to look for when you're reading some of these descriptions and things, because there's a whole wide, long list of different varieties that you can grow out here, and we don't have time to go through all of those. So a little bit about rootstocks, disease resistance, flavor. They don't taste good, we're not gonna bring them home. And things you can use them for, storing, that kind of thing. Okay, mostly I'm gonna start out with apples, but a lot of this is also applicable to pears, peaches, cherries. And the one thing to keep in mind for us, as far as certainly apples, is that if you've only bought your apples at the grocery store, the ones that you may be most familiar with in the grocery store may or may not do well here in Western Washington. Some of our most familiar ones, Red Delicious, Yellow Delicious, those kind of things, really don't do that well around here. Luckily though, there are many varieties that do well here on the west side, and I'm going to tell you where to find them and how to pick them out. So if you only pick one thing to write down in this whole talk or whatever, this is what I would put down. We're really fortunate because there's the WSU Fruit Research Lab up in Mount Vernon, and that's what they do, is they trial the different varieties that do well around here, different rootstocks, different varieties. So it's a tremendous resource. A lot of it's kind of for commercial growers, but there's a lot of information to this for the backyard gardener. They have a demonstration garden there. I've been up there a couple of times. It's a lot of fun. Sometimes you can read descriptions of these different kinds of fruit trees on different rootstocks, but seeing them actually growing there, you get a whole lot better idea of what they're going to look like maybe in your yard. So this is a nice little colorful thing too that I put in there. And I'm sure you can't read all the stuff that's on the left, but basically it's all the different kinds of fruits that they are trialing there. And so definitely, if you happen to be in the Mount Vernon area, it is worth a stop. So where to find more information? Our neighbors down to the south, Oregon State University, also has a number of excellent publications about choosing varieties that do well here on the rainy west side. When I was poking around the internet, I found this site called insteading.com, which is sort of like homesteading for the modern age. And there are a lot of information on there, but among other things, they've got their list of the best fruit trees for Seattle, and we're, pretty much in the same climate there. So this is a much smaller list than, say, is on the WSU research site. So if you kind of wanted just a shorter list, then you might want to investigate some of these first. They divide them out by early, mid, and late. Also, other places for information, the say South Sound Fruit Society They have meetings, they've got events, they've got a lot of knowledgeable people that are pretty much growing a lot of different fruit varieties in their backyards. Probably any question that you could come up with about growing fruit, somebody there probably knows the answer. We have a number of specialty nurseries around here. Burnt Ridge, which is in Alaska, Rain Tree, which is down in Morton, One Green World is in Molalla, Oregon, but all of these specialize in varieties that will do well here in our climate, and also rootstocks for different situations that can get you what you want. Basically, go back to places to buy them, and also great information on their websites. Burnt Ridge, if you don't want to drive down to Alaska, they have a booth at the Olympia Farmers Market, and I've ordered things off their website and then picked them up in Olympia, so that's a good local source. Eastside Urban Farm and Garden, and I confess I have not been there, I've driven past it, but I was really impressed looking at their website. It looks like they have a lot of different varieties that are recommended for our part of the world, and a good selection of rootstocks too, so you might want to check that out, another local source. Rain Tree Nursery down in Morton, they've been in business for a long time. They're kind of our lead standard, I guess, for varieties that do well around here. Probably the majority of the fruit trees that we have on our property, the original owner put in ones from Rain Tree, we put in ones from Rain Tree. They have great, knowledgeable people and a lot of varieties that do really well around here. On the WSU research site, they also had a few that are a little bit farther afield, up in Mount Vernon and Emerson. And One Green World, I've seen their catalogs. That's the one that's in Molalla, Oregon. Oh my gosh, you read their catalog and it's just your mouth starts watering. It's like, oh, temptation. But they also look like they've got a great selection of varieties and rootstocks. So on the WSU side, it's a long list, and we don't have any kind of time to go through all of those, but I did select, they have a smaller subset that's scab resistant varieties, and I would strongly recommend getting disease resistant varieties right off the bat, because it'll have much better quality of fruit with a whole lot less effort. So these are the ones that are on their scab resistant varieties. So any of those would be, Liberty is one that, for those of you that signed up for the grafting demonstration, we've got some Liberty scion of our trees. And so, you know, there's a lot of other ones too. The image there on the left is of a Liberty apple, and I put it in there just because the experts that know how to identify apples, these are a lot of the characteristics that they're looking for. They look at it from the top, from the bottom, from the side, they cut it through horizontally, they cut it through vertically, they look at those patterns that the seeds make, they look at the seeds themselves, and that's how they know and they can identify different varieties. So I thought that was kind of an interesting thing. Another thing that you're gonna need to know is bloom time, because you're gonna need a pollinizer. Even an apple tree or other kinds of fruit trees, if it says that it's self-fertile, probably you'll have better fruit production if you have something else that can pollinize it, that's gonna be blooming at the same time. So this is kind of, I don't remember if this one's from the OSU site, it's either the WSU site or the OSU site. What I thought was interesting is the number of ones that are sterile. Gravenstein, gosh, we've got several Gravensteins. It's a good thing I wasn't counting on them to be pollinizing the other apples, because they're not gonna be doing it. So that's another thing to keep in mind, is that you're gonna have to have a pollinizer out there. And the ones in pink are sterile, so they're not gonna be doing you any good. Other than that, this tells you what time they bloom, and so you can kind of select which ones might be blooming that can pollinize each other. Andrew briefly talked about grafting, but, and you're gonna find out a lot more about the ones that stuck around for the workshop. But there's two parts. The upper part is called scion, and then the part below ground is the rootstock. They're two totally separate varieties of trees. Where they're connected is by the graft. Why buy a grafted fruit tree? Probably the first thing that comes to mind is height. It's a way that you can get a much shorter, easier to maintain, easier to reach tree than a standard tree. So in this, the illustration, there's the rootstocks are at the bottom, and then you kind of cut them off, and then the scion wood is at the top, and then we grafted, they will have the best qualities both above ground and below ground for what you want. So this is just a kind of a graphic that shows if you have a standard tree over here, that's the orange, how it kind of gets shorter is for your different rootstocks. And I don't know if you can read any of those, Emla and bud and various other things, but it shows you the different rootstocks, how they have that dwarfing capacity. And I would strongly recommend that you go down there where the blacks and grays are, the dwarfs and semi-dwarfs. It just makes a much more manageable tree, and you'll still get plenty of fruit. This is a little bit different graphic. I like it because it has not only apples, but it has pears, cherries, apricots, peaches, nectarines, plums, with some select varieties of rootstocks, and also what they do as far as the height of the tree. Now, this is not an exhaustive list by any means. These are just kind of some representative samples. Columnar apples, Andrew talked a little bit about this. These are in pots, so gosh, probably anybody, you can put them on a patio, you can put them on a deck. They don't take up very much space at all, but you can see you get quite a bit of fruit off of them. So they're a lot easier to prune and maintain, and so it's certainly something to consider. You know, we've got ours on the ground, but you can also plant them in pots. Make sure they don't dry out, is probably the only thing. These are specific varieties for columnar apples, so it's not like you're gonna get a Fuji that's in a columnar shape. These are specifically bred to have this very narrow profile. So this is just kind of some examples of the things that you might be looking for if you're trying to pick out a variety. And these happen to be scion wood that we brought from our orchard for the workshop here later on. We've got Ravenstein, Liberty, Spartan, and then the rootstock is Budagovsky 9, which sounds like it's from Russia. It's also very short growing. And the things that you want to look for are disease resistant. Liberty and Spartan are both very disease resistant. They're also good all around apples. They're good for eating fresh. They store well. They are resistant to, what Spartan is, resistant scab, mildew, fire blight. Liberty is also another very disease resistant one. It's also kind of a good all around type apple. Ravenstein, in my mind, makes the absolute best applesauce. It's not quite as resistant to scab and some of the other diseases. It's a very vigorous tree, and it's sterile, so you can't count on it for pollinizing. But, oh, and it also doesn't keep as well. It'll keep for several weeks, but it's not as good a keeper as some of the other varieties. Pears. My understanding is that there's also going to be some pears available for those that want to do that today. This is from the WSU Research Lab. Now, luckily, most pears really do well here on the west side. These are ones that are kind of in order of ripening. And this is just an example of the pear rootstock. This happens to be the one that's going to be available today. But again, things you're looking for is it work well in our zone, and these do. This has got a little bit of the history where this rootstock was developed. Basically, it's going to dwarf it to like half to 2/3 of what the full height would be. Very resistant to fire blight, collar rot, woolly, pear aphids, pear climb. So this is a really healthy rootstock, and it's going to be available too. My understanding is that the two pears that are available are Orca and Bartlett. Probably most of you are familiar with Bartlett's. They are in the grocery store. Great, eating fresh. Orca was a seedling, And that's a picture of it, kind of longer, thinner, kind of a blush on it. It's a really pretty apple. So these are available to the people doing the workshop. And also, kind of tells you different things that you want to know. How well does it keep? How disease resistant is it? Peaches. This is going to be pretty short and sweet. My total recommendation is only buy peach leaf curl resistant varieties. The kind of the three that I found, there's probably other ones out there, but Frost, Avalon Pride, and Q18, which is also called Salish Summer. It's a white fleshed peach. So if you're looking for one that's got good peach leaf curl resistance and is a white flesh, you might want to consider that one. We have Frost and we have Avalon Pride. Frost was one of the very first ones that came out that was peach leaf curl resistant. It's probably been on the market for 40, maybe even 50 years now. And it was so exciting when it came out because it's like, oh wow, we can finally grow peaches here on the west side. My Avalon Pride in my mind is it has a better taste, but for us, it hasn't been as productive as Frost is. So those are some of the things to keep in mind, but whatever you do, try to get one that's peach leaf curl resistant. It just makes, you'll have much better fruit with a whole lot less effort. Cherries. Cherries have been frustrating for us. We have, well, our pie cherry from Montmorency is a big tree. It does really well. We have pie cherries pretty much every year. It's a huge tree. The birds get like 90% of the fruit, but there's enough that we can enjoy some too. The sweet cherries, even though we probably had 7 or 8 different varieties of sweet cherries over the years, and none of them have really been outstanding. I don't know, it's just our property or something that we're doing. We always buy ones that are the varieties that are supposed to be doing well in our area. They're supposed to be disease resistant. And either they're not very productive, like right now we've got Sweetheart. Frankly, I feel kind of jilted by Sweetheart because it's just not giving us very many cherries. We get a handful and have to fight off the birds to get them. So this is a graphic from the Oregon State site, and what I liked about it is because it's the numbers there, 1s, 2s, or whatever, those are zones. We would be equivalent of 1, and what you would see is that probably the most common ones, the beans, vans, Rainiers, really don't do that great over here in our climate. However, there are a lot of other varieties that do, and so pick one of those instead. What I like about this is it does tell you a little bit about what colonizes each other, and a little description of what they look like, that kind of thing. So, look for the ones that have 1 biome. And I guess I'm curious, does anybody out here have a sweet cherry that has done really well for you?
We actually planted at our old house on Arcadia, which is in Shelton. We did a Bing and a Rainier, and they're extremely slow. And we only got a handful. The birds would have I'd watch there'd be tons of cherries, but not quite ready to pick. And then the next day they'd be gone. Like the birds came at night and took it all. Like what happened here? But they're doing really well. But at this point, they're what? Probably 10.
Probably 8, 10 years old.
8, 10 years old now. But they did really well.
So for those on Zoom or whatever, she was saying she has a Bing and a Rainier, and they were very slow growing. The birds get most of the cherries, but they've done fairly well. Anybody else have any experience with sweet cherries? Yeah.
Not sweet. I'm trying Nanking cherries. Are those a different?
I'm not sure. I'm not familiar with Nanking cherries.
Nanking.
Did they do really well?
This is my second spring. They were just little guys. But they're very early. I think they're a Russian variety, I want to say. Yellow flowers. So the deer got to them last year, so we'll see if I get anything this year.
Okay. He's saying he has Nanking, so that might be a variety to try. Okay, just a little word about combination trees. There's advantages and there's disadvantages. And combination trees, basically you've got one trunk and then it's grafted on there. It might be 3, 4, sometimes even 5 different varieties on one tree. The advantages are you've got all these varieties in one little tree, so they all take advantage of the same rootstock. Hopefully they will pollinize each other, hopefully whoever did the grafting has taken that into account, so they'll pollinize each other. Some of the disadvantages though is that even though they're on the same rootstock, some varieties are much more vigorous than others. And so over time, one variety often will dominate the whole tree. If you realize that at the time, you can prune the heck out of that one and try to keep it even. But it's easy for one variety to kind of get away from you until, 10 years down the road or something, you've got one that's really dominating the tree. Another disadvantage is if you happen to lose a limb, a storm, disease, the graft doesn't take, whatever, you've lost that whole variety. So if you've got a variety that's really important to you, you might want to consider getting a separate dwarf tree just for that, rather than to rely on a combination tree. And so, in summary, pick a variety that does well here in Western Washington. Pick a rootstock that is going to meet your needs for size, disease resistance, and soils. And make sure you have a pollinizer, and then happy growing. Any questions?